Well, dating all the way back to the most ancient of times when some flinty Israelite sergeant said, "You can't bring down those walls with those newfangled horns at Jericho." The chief petty officer or the sergeant, the non-commissioned officer, has been the backbone of the Army and the Navy and all militaries as long as we've known it. And now we've got a situation where the NCOs are the problem. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. Guys, it's a trope, and it's a trope that's based on reality. How many times have we seen it where some West Point lieutenant, wet behind the ears, walks out into the middle of a combat situation for the first time, immediately orders some absolutely insane command, and is restrained by the sergeant who's been a pillar of wisdom and common sense and so on and so. We see it so many times because it's fundamentally true. Well, things continue to deteriorate in the United States military, and I'm not talking about the quality of our ships either. I'm talking about the quality of our crews. A USS Manchester is a LCS, littoral combat ship, but Steve, that's otherwise known as a
little crappy ship.
Little crappy ship, right. They were originally commissioned, two designs, Liberty and the Independence class, if I recall correctly, in the days immediately after 9/11, when we would think we'd be doing nothing but fighting wars on terror. A littoral ship means basically brown water Navy. Rule of thumb is within sight of land. So we're retiring these. So they're not the large ships. They're probably the smallest active duty military ships, fighting ships in the Navy. Here's what happened on board USS Manchester's Gold crew. A group of chief petty officers, these would be the rational, seasoned, patriotic, sensible, smart, non-arrogant heart of the ship, got together and decided that they didn't like the fact that when they were deployed on a cruise, they didn't have their internet. They couldn't check their emails. They couldn't stream their movies. They couldn't go to their various favorite websites. So one of the chiefs, who I think was actually the senior chief of the boat, who was name was Grizel Marrero, Chief Marrero, decided, you know what we could do? Before we ship out, why don't we order ourselves a Starlink internet station? Now, she's also one of the information officers on the ship. She understands the value of electronic security. She's not in charge of the kitchen, or the mess hall, I should say. So basically what they did was, without the knowledge of the commanding officer or the Navy, to say the least, they ordered a Starlink Starbase with base receiver and came up with some reason why somebody should have to work in the rigging, and they decided to mount this Starlink internet receiver on top of one of the decks, one of the enclosures above the decks, where it would be conveniently invisible to everybody unless you happen to be as far aloft as you could possibly be up in the top of the masthead there. They did not share the password for this unauthorized Wi-Fi, which continued while they were out at sea with their commanding officers.
In the Western Pacific, where the Chinese are.
Where the Chinese are, yeah, exactly. They didn't share this information with the COs because it hadn't been approved. And they didn't share it with the regular crew either. This was just for the chiefs. I think the total number was 15 chief petty officers had gotten together on this deal, pitched in the money, and gave themselves their own private little chief petty officers' internet as they went sailing into hostile waters, completely transmitting every piece of data that you could possibly have that might be of any interest to anybody listening, and hilarity ensued, let's say. Scott, this Chief Marrero was court-martialed, found guilty, and busted all the way down to E7, which is still I think she should have been busted to E0.
Should have been drummed out of the service.
Should have been court-martialed and put in prison is what she should have been done. But she was reduced in rank to E7, which is still fairly lofty.
It was just one grade, by the way. She was E8 before that. One grade.
Here, take a one straight demotion. And by all means, remain in the Navy so that you can continue to serve our country honorably and with the highest regard for our national security. But what's especially disturbing to so many of us military strategy types, the professionals and amateurs like myself alike, are that this is not the kind of behavior we expect from non-commissioned officers. The non-coms have, as I said, been the backbone, the heart and soul of both land, surface, and now air units. They're supposed to be the ones that have clawed their way up from the ranks. They came in with regular people. They don't have the Annapolis mindset or the West Point mindset or the Air Force Academy mindset. They're supposed to be practical, realistic people. They are the gears that make the military turn. And for 15 of these people to get together to illegally and surreptitiously install an internet Wi-Fi receiver, have their own private internet. And by the way, this incredible genius, Chief Marrero, decided to put a name on the Wi-Fi, because that's what you do. So she called it Stinky. And as it turns out, everybody on board the ship out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, Scott, would turn on their personal devices and see a Wi-Fi signal from Stinky. And sooner or later, somebody got the idea that, what the hell is this thing?
Check it out.
Yeah.
So you're saying they bugged their own ship?
Yes.
Holy cow. I guess we need to update the war poster to say loose encrypts sink ships. It's just unbelievable that anybody would do this, especially somebody who had enough understanding of technology to know that you could do it. Because the first thought in any, especially information officer's mind, should have been, what are the security consequences of what I'm about to do here? I mean, this is, as if I thought I could use my neighbor's internet to transmit private banking information. This is just insane. And the fact that her punishment was so light, and all of their punishments were so light, says bad things about the state of the Navy in general. It reminds me of an analogy somebody told me years ago about the difference between a cruise ship and a battleship. And on a battleship, everybody has a job and a mission, and they're focused on that task. On a cruise ship, they're complaining about the size of the shrimp on the buffet. And it sounds to me...
Or the lack of internet access.
Yes. And it sounds to me like we've got more of the buffet brand of NCOs, or at least on that vessel. Now, I don't want to paint with a broad brush here and assume that the entire, Navy is given over to wanting to see HBO Max while on duty. But, there are some things you give up when you volunteer to serve your country that way. And one of those things is your ability to communicate as loosely as we do in this world. And, we wander around with tracking devices all day long, but we're not serving the U.S. military. We're not putting a dot on our ship in the middle of hostile waters within range of Chinese detection. This is absurd, insane, and should have been punished much more severely. But more importantly, I always look at processes first, people second. What kind of process on that ship allowed them to think that this was something they could do, get away with, and in worst case scenario, get a wrist slap?
Aha! Now you see the plot thins. When this was reported to the commanding officer by enlisted personnel, that there appeared to be a Wi-Fi signal, Chief Marrero was questioned by the captain of the Manchester, which would be Commander Colleen Moore. She was asked about this, and Marrero denied it. As soon as that meeting was over, Marrero went back out there and changed the name of the Wi-Fi network from Stinky to something which is what she should have done in the first place. I mean, if you're going to be a treasonous, sack of crap, you might as well be good at it. And so she basically changed the Wi-Fi network to something that looked like a Wi-Fi printer. Like it was just a device on board the ship, which would have aroused an awful lot less suspicion. But as it turned out, a week or two went by, and then somebody brought it to the CO's attention again. She was confronted again, and then it went on and on and on. And I don't know how much, it was 6-7 more days before finally they did an inspection of the ship. Couldn't find anything inside the ship because it wasn't inside the ship. It was outside the ship. It was on top of the ship. Steve, as you know, and as anybody knows anything about the Navy knows, a naval vessel is an isolated kingdom. They operate sometimes in fleets, and then the king of the fleet is the king of the kingdoms, but the ship is the kingdom, and the captain is the king or queen of that vessel, and everything that happens on board that vessel is a direct result of the temperament and character of the commanding officer. You don't have 15 chiefs of a boat, or of a ship in this case. Not all of them were in on it, but none of them reported it. That's the bottom
part.
line,
Yeah.
right? So my problem is not with Grisel Marrero, who should have been dishonorably discharged and have that reputation follow her around for the rest of her life. My problem is actually with the CO. As it turns out, one of the reasons that this played a little longer than it should have was because the commanding officer, Commander Moore, she might have been lieutenant commander at the time, was depending heavily on Chief Marrero because the executive officer had been relieved of command. Now, people get rotated in and out of staff positions all the time, but being relieved is relatively unusual. So if your executive officer has been relieved of command and now as captain, you find yourself depending more on this chief petty officer, apparently the ranking chief petty officer, and you get a report that there's an illicit Wi-Fi network on your ship, and you talk to your chief, and the chief says, well, I don't know anything about it. And you just let it go. And then another week later, somebody else comes back and says, oh, we still got this Wi-Fi signal, and you search the ship and you don't find it, and you still let it go. This is a official picture of Colleen Moore, captain of the Manchester. She looks a little demented to me, to be perfectly honest. And
I saw that photo. Yeah.
Yeah, and Steve, this is happening on board a little crappy ship, but they're drawing from the same pool of personnel that they used to man the USS Gerald Ford and USS Connecticut and all the rest of our top of the line stuff. So this scares the living daylights out of me, Steve. It just scares the snot out of me.
Me too. And the fact that the chief petty officer was the mastermind behind this brilliant treasonous scheme is the most worrisome part. Because let's talk about that backbone thing. I learned about this thing when I was a 12-year-old. The Army might commission lieutenants, but the sergeants train them. This goes way back. And as I think you said in your intro, and I learned this, I think, when I was 12 years old. The movie Stripes came out, and this was a very important moment in my life. My cousins snuck me in to see it on the big screen, even though it was rated R. And I was already a big Bill Murray fan. I liked Harold Ramis, John Candy. I knew all these guys, but John Larroquette as Captain Stillman in this movie was brilliant. And one of the reasons this movie was so important to me at the age of 12 and seeing it on the big screen was John Larroquette's, oh, I wish I was a loofah moment. And if you know, you just maybe go back and watch that movie. But Larroquette was exactly that stupid officer who has to get corrected by his sergeant that you were talking about in the intro. There's a sequence where they're training on mortars, and the dutiful corporal or sergeant, whatever he was, is trying to get this thing aimed, and Stillman comes along and says, "Fire the weapon." "But sir, I don't know where it's good." "I said fire the weapon," and that's how Sergeant Hulka ends up getting blown up. Anyway, so I learned about this in a movie comedy at a young age, and it turns out to be very, very true in the militaries, I should say, of free countries. The sergeants, the NCOs are the backbones. You go to the Russian model, you go to the Arab world model, and nothing can be decided by anybody less than a colonel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and we, in the free world, we drill the decision-making down as far down the chain as we possibly can. There was a saying in World War II that the most powerful weapon in the world was a U.S. soldier, an American soldier, with a radio. Because that guy, probably a corporal, maybe a sergeant, with that one of those huge Motorola radios on his back, he had the authority to call in every artillery gun in range if he saw something and could report it in on that radio. Just massive responsibility on the little guy's shoulders, and that's the way free armies run. And if we can't rely on our sergeants in the Army, if we can't rely on our chief petty officers in the Navy, I mean, they're the ones who run the ships. I'm out of words.
Yeah.
I'm out of words for the danger that puts us in, because structurally we still drill down that decision-making power as low as we can go. But if the shoulders aren't there, then neither is the ability to fight.
I've done several episodes on this increasing laxity among our armed services, and I've said this many times. We have 11 carrier strike groups. If we have 11 carrier strike groups that are staffed by people like Chief Marrero and, at least as far as I'm able to read into the story, Commander Moore, then I would rather have 3 carrier strike groups that were staffed by people who gave a damn about what they were doing, knew what they were doing, took it seriously, and went at it like professionals. I was thinking about this story an awful lot for the last 24 hours, and I was actually came home late last night, and I was just pulling the garbage cans out of the road and putting them back on the side of the house. And I said to myself, this whole thing can be avoided. This doesn't have to be this way. I've been doing an awful lot of research on the Navy in the Pacific. It's my next pitch to Daily Wire. It hasn't been approved, but that's what I would like to do next, is the Navy in the Pacific. And looking at that astonishing, miraculous World War II in the Pacific. And I look at this and I think about the quality of the men and the women, not the men and the women, the men that served in the Navy in World War II. And I realized that at the beginning of the war, you had all of these peace admirals, captains, chiefs, and so on, who had to be removed and replaced by warfighters. And I thought, there's got to be a way to avoid this. And my sad realization, folks, is that there is no way to avoid this. This is what happens in this giant 80-year cycle of history, in this, as we get further and further and further away from the crisis, we believe that crises cannot possibly exist. We get softer and softer and softer, and our softness is what precipitates the next crisis, and then we have to go through the crucible of fire again and get rid of people like this, rid of people like that, get rid of ships like the Manchester in the first place. And we have to go through this whole thing again and again and again and again and again, because that is how human beings are built. The Titanic sailed into a known ice field at full speed because it wanted to set a transatlantic speed record, and it hadn't been sunk by an iceberg yet, and chances were pretty good it wasn't going to be sunk by one in the next hour. But that's how humans work. I think this kind of thing, I regret deeply to say it, is unavoidable. I think the only way you're going to get rid of this kind of rot, this kind of narcissism, selfishness, lack of responsibility, entitlement, all of it, is through the crucible of fire. I'd like to tell you that it doesn't have to be this way. And my final thought on the night as I went to bed last night is, this is the curse of people like me and Steve and Scott, and if you're watching this, almost certainly you. There are people, they say, we don't ever learn the lessons of history. Some of us actually do. Some of us do. And it is the curse of people who learn the lessons of history to watch history go through these cycles again and again and again and simply scream to the heavens, why is this going on? Why don't we stop it? And the answer is, we don't stop it because we can't. It's how we're built. I like to think that sweeping political reforms could go in and undo an awful lot of the damage that was intentionally done to the military under the Obama administration and the Biden administration. I still have high hopes that we can improve that. But until we have some kind of a serious crisis that takes people like this as far away from the controls of weapon systems as possible, then we're going to continue to watch this to happen. And it's our job to make sure that we don't ever forget what a real fighting Navy actually looks like and the kind of people that make it up. For Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Right Angle.